Welcome back, everyone. This is Chase, and joining me again after a little bit of a hiatus, I feel like, Bruce Johnson, creator of the History of Gear project. Thanks for joining me again. It's been a minute since we've talked about a company. For a minute there, we were doing more of conversations about the evolution of different types of gear, and we took a little break, seemed like, and now we're back. I think we're both ready to get back and talk about, you know, some of these influential gear companies. And one, I imagine this one has got to be influential for you. It's one of those Pacific Northwest companies, one of those
Yes,
Seattle,
indeed.
Washington companies, early winners.
Yeah, this company personally was one that myself, my sister, my mother, we were all buying gear from this place and enjoying their products. So in addition to it being like local, so that's the personal link, but they're an interesting little company. So why don't we put up a picture of the founder, the president of the company. His name is Bill Nicolai. The key thing about this picture is that the company in those days, it was the days of long hair and beards, and he apparently was one of them. He's wearing a prototype Gore-Tex Parka there. It may be the anorak version. And so this is one of the company's biggest claims to fame, which is being the first with a Gore-Tex Parka. And that's Bill Nicolai, who started things off in 1972. Let's go to that picture of the tent. The story goes that he was up on Early Winter's spire in the North Cascades and got a tent destroyed by terrible winds, big storm, and wanted to design his own version of the very strongest and best mountain tent. Came up with something that he called the Omnipotent, and that was in 1972. Show me that other picture of the Omnipotent. Yeah, this is off their catalog, 1974, showing the Omnipotent with its mid-poles and its optional vestibule attachment there. So let's move on to me just giving some background on the whole world of gear back there in 1971, 72, the time period where Early Winters was trying to get itself started was a really active period. There were a lot of companies getting started at that time. There were a lot of companies who'd already been up and running during the late 60s, like Sierra Designs and North Face and MSR, some of these that we've talked about before. Holleybar was still very big in the market. Jerry had already been kind of taken over by a corporate entity that kind of switched them over to downhill ski clothing. So they were starting to fade out of the picture of gear companies making tents and sleeping bags. So along comes this guy, Bill Nicolai, with what he thinks is a really great four-season tent design. And it's his only product. The competition is fierce, and I'll outline some of that. We've got North Face, we've got Holleybar, we've got Sierra Designs, all producing really high quality tents designed for extreme four-season use. We've got the JanSport Mountain Dome at that time. And in back of it all, we've got Stevenson Warmlight, who in 1958, before anybody else was experimenting with prototypes of a tent that was based on aerodynamic principles, the elliptical arch, he called it technically. So we had lots of competition. Warm Light had publicly in a catalog started selling their tent in 64. You could get it in a kind of upgraded expedition version with a mid pole. And anyway, so the background of Early Winters trying to make a go of it is interesting. And the story goes that at first, Bill Nicolai was selling his tents made it in the basement of a friend on something like a ping pong table, cutting out the pieces with an X-Acto knife, that he was selling them at street fairs in Seattle. So he was joined in that initial effort by a fellow named Ron Zimmerman, who became what I would call the company's marketing genius and really led to its success. Let me read to you something from Bill Edwards. There were two Bills, Bill Nicolai, Bill Edwards. Bill Edwards was an architect who gave up his architecture to join the company a little later than the very first principles. But he's written a lot to me. So he writes here, there were three principles. Bill Nicolai, the founder and president, myself, vice president of product operations, and employee number 3 after Bill and Helene Hood, our first sewing machine operator, and Ron Zimmerman, vice president of marketing. The three of us worked together for 12 years to build the company. You may want to contact Ron and Bill for their input. And indeed, I have had input from most of those people. And I totally agree with Bill Edwards here that it would be just so wonderful if one or more of these folks came on in person, because there's all sorts of things I'd like to ask them. Like I'd like to see Bill Nicolai talk about, well, where did you learn to sew high quality mountain tents? Where did you get the machine? How long did it take to perfect this design? Did you have misfires? Lots of things that they could add. I don't know other information about the company. How big did their employee, how many employees did they end up with? What was their sales volume, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they ran from 72 to about 85.
Well, and like you said, this was such an active period of time. Like, what a time to be jumping into the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious to ask them, what were you thinking, right? Like, what did you think you really had something unique that would set you apart? And clearly they did. But that's a really daunting period of time to want to jump in when you've got all these soon-to-be juggernaut companies and some juggernauts of the past, right? With Jerry and Holubar. So it'd be interesting to get into that with them.
Yes, oh indeed. And for me, the Omnipotent was an interesting tent. I owned one at one point, but that was in the 2000s. I just owned it because I was curious about it, picked it up on eBay. But their big break was when a Gore-Tex rep came around saying, we got this new material, who wants to try it out? And this rep had apparently had a lot of no's at that point from the big companies like Eddie Bauer and North Face. Nah, we don't, I don't know. And they said, yeah, we'll try some. And they went ahead and produced a mountain parka, the first Gore-Tex mountain parka in the world. And shortly thereafter, a tent made out of Gore-Tex, a single wall tent. And that was also a first. And then with I would venture to say, the marketing geniuses of Ron Zimmerman, they made some great catalogs and really marched ahead and became a pretty big player in that early period of time. And we have talked on this podcast about how companies that make durable products like tents, sleeping bags, packs, how they survive or not, depending on a lot of factors. But one of them is, do they sell anything that they can keep selling year after year after year to a customer base? And early winters, in addition to being first with the Gore-Tex, I think they were first really in the history of any major gear company to try selling a bunch of really strange, exotic products. And that many were only loosely affiliated with being like a backpacker. So I have a couple examples, and then we have a whole bunch of pictures to show people. Like this is one of the many weird little things they were selling. It's a great little box. It seals up tight as can be. It's slick and shiny, and I've had this thing for forever, 30 years plus. It's very useful. They had a lot of stuff.
It's one of
like
those loosely affiliated camping gear products, right? It's like,
right.
Oh, this could be really great, camping or doing whatever, storing all sorts of different stuff in it, but not maybe a core outdoor product that would jump out at you, right? It's a nice accessory, an add-on.
Now, I was going to wear this, but with my pandemic haircut here, it would make me look terrible after I took it off. This is another little product, a silk balaclava. You could wear it under a climbing helmet, see?
Yeah.
You could wear it under your motorcycle helmet, under your bicycle helmet. So I've still got this little guy. Not that I wear it much. Usually I'd wear it more like a rolled up, like a little stocking cap. And I also still have this thing, which is a Gore-Tex bivouac sack that they made. If one can see the label here. There we go. Now, some uncharitably have called their label the blowhard label. To me, and I could be wrong, and I could be corrected by Bill Edwards or Bill Nicolai or Ron Zimmerman, the label to me is like true to form. That's how the company got started. They got blown off a mountain, got a tent destroyed by high winds. So it seems kind of authentic, probably. And I like that about it. Well, let's put on some of those strange and quirky products. Yeah, so early winters under Ron Zimmerman, at first they were one product, the Omnipotent. Then with the Gore-Tex, they had tent mountain parka as a basis of the company. And then a year or two later, you start seeing in their catalogs just a whole host of really diverse, kind of somewhat related to to outdoor topics, products appearing. And yeah, I have all four of these, and all these years later, they're still useful. This is a candle lantern, which during the 70s, it seems like a number of companies started selling these, including early winters. This one's from REI. So they use a candle, either a little tea candle, TEA, or a plumber's candle, which lasted a great deal longer. They even added a little bit of heat to a tent in the wintertime. And you could get them in a beautiful brass, too, in the Christmas catalog. So there you go. Next one.
Oh, we got an upside down one.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, I'll just talk through this. To me, this is one of the most amazing little things. The Chinese bird kites. Now, I don't know, maybe you backpack that into your favorite little mountain lake and fly it, but okay. They were also selling some of the Gore-Tex. They had bike booties. So again, number of products that could be year after year sold, and new products every year. And I have an ex-employee email that says this is one of the things she loved the most about the company, is just this quirky catalog that was always changing, and all these interesting new products they were putting in them. Next picture. Oh, this is just my picture of what catalogs I do have, and it traces the evolution of the company, because long about 84, 85, Orvis, the fishing company, took them over. And Orvis, as I recall, also had taken over, was it Holly Bar or one of the other big companies? They're buying up outdoor companies. Yeah. That didn't last very long, that Orvis had them. Then somebody else bought them briefly. And then finally they ended up with Norm Thompson, which is a company that I had been very fond of down in Portland. They had a store there that called themselves Expedition Outfitters, where you could go in. They had water buffalo heads on the wall, and safari clothing, and there was always free wine and cheese. But that's who ended up with the company. And then that spun itself off into Saheli, which was around at least until about 2008. And then now I think it's gone completely. So that's the history of the company in a nutshell. So next picture. This kind of illustrates the company's quirky catalogs, okay? Fun stuff. They're selling pants for the outdoors, and some of these people here went on with the company. I think I know who that is. I think I might know who that is, but we'll leave that up to Bill Edwards to.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I imagined maybe some employees hidden in here. Is Bill in there? I feel like I see Bill Edwards in there.
I know, I'm guessing, but okay. So go on, next one. This is my Gore-Tex bivy sack. English rugby shorts, a compass. Okay, well, everybody needs a compass in the woods. Next one. Selling the last flashlight you'll ever have to buy. This was a design using a little, if I can see that, I think if this is the shake design that has a little kind of a magnet thing in it that generates electricity for a little while. You can see it gets a lot of space in the catalog.
Yeah.
Okay, next. A pad, the tree finders.
The cosmic sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. That was the kind of language that they would use brilliantly.
Is that the Ron Zimmerman marketing?
Yeah, I could pull out a email from him where he talks about that he basically did all the catalogs this whole period, from their very first one to their last real catalog in 1985. The tough little stove that does it all. I had one of those stoves at one point. If I can see that right, I think it's a Coleman. Very, very tough, durable, reliable stove, quite heavy.
Yeah, so while they were making a lot of their own products, they were selling the products of other people too. Kind of interesting. Were other companies doing that at the time? Outside of the REIs of the world, right? Were there other companies that were kind of doing this? Was a North Face doing something like this in their catalog, selling other people's stuff?
Again, I believe this is another first, definitely to the extent that Early Winters did it. It was a first
Hmm.
to just be having, True Blue, their own great product, right? And then all this other stuff from all kinds of other sources. Next one.
Oh, binoculars.
And so here we have these. I'm an amateur astronomer. These actually are terrific binoculars. Pretty much the best that you could have bought back then for a mini binocular. So there it is. And I've had emails, incidentally, from people who were customers in the old days who think I'm Early Winters, and they want, oh, I want those binoculars, or I've trashed my Chinese bird kite. I want to order a new one. So you have people out there still wanting their stuff, these quirky things.
That kind of brings up the question, so over the course of the company, you said they existed from 1972 to when was it? In the early Winters form, I guess.
Yeah, 85. And again, those later 80s, from about my last catalog to the end where I'm told by Zimmerman that their last real catalog was in 85. I don't know if they had the full range of products, tents, and so forth, all the way up through 85.
Right. So you mentioned that, I mean, the core product's really capturing people's attention, but then all these quirky items too that people are still looking for. Was that apparent at the time? Was that something that really drew people in? And obviously people still remember it and they still have some affinity for the company. What was it like in the moment? I mean, you saw this company kind of rise, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was the response from most people that were in the industry seeing this company kind of come up?
I didn't see a lot of people hop right in and start to be imitating that approach. Again, like you indicated, RAI, of course, had a wide product line. Back on the East Coast, EMS, had tons of stuff. Not that they were making a whole lot of new innovative products themselves, but they were marketing all sorts of products from other companies. Let's go to the next one of these. Okay, the tree finders and the pad. Go ahead, one more.
Oh, there it is. The cheese knife.
Yep, the French. This isn't just any old knife. If you want to be an authentic outdoors person, have gourmet food outdoors, you got to have a French folding country knife. Now, these weren't high quality steel. I had one. They were just nice little things. The way that they were advertised just made people want to have one, and wanted, and people would therefore, since the products changed from catalog to catalog, that encouraged people to always open up that catalog that came in the mail. Don't throw it away. Let's see what new stuff they got in there.
Well, I don't know if this was conscious or not, but this kind of seems like an attempt to expand the definition of the outdoors, right? I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe I'm making that up, but kind of seems like at this time there's a lot of the extreme outdoor companies, right? The North Face. These are companies making the best of the best, and I mean they were making that as well. With the Parka and the Omnipotent, things that could withstand all the elements. But it seems like they're trying to cater to the other extreme. Maybe the casual outdoor person, the person who needs their cheese knife, right? Or wants to buy a kite. So it's kind of interesting them trying to serve, I imagine, some very different customers.
Oh, you make a good point there. Yeah, you can't even imagine. Here we are at Everest Base Camp, and these people pulling out their French bread knives, and flying a Chinese bird kite. No, this is a whole different clientele. The next one, let's see what we got next. Oh, I love this. Oh, this is my personal favorite. Okay, so click through to the next one. Now, the size of this, look at this. You need a microscope to read this little cookbook, but it's the real deal. It actually is a little cookbook designed with recipes for the out of doors. There's a little story behind this. I was contacted by a woman who lived down the street from the original Early Winters store, which is on Queen Anne Avenue. It was an old family grocery store that Early Winters took over and inhabited for about a year and a half, from 74 to mid 76. Anyway, this woman rented to them. And years and years later, after they'd been long gone, they were demolishing her building that used to be her building, which was not very far away from Early Winters, and she found a whole box full of these. For some reason, down in the basement of this house that was being demolished, and she sent me one. So to me, this is kind of special, and the ultimate in a quirky product.
It's so small. That is funny. And is it Bob? Who was the author there, or the illustrator? Now, Bob was a part of the well, no, I seem to remember Bob being. That name's come up before. Are you familiar with that name?
Bob?
Yeah, Bob. Is it HISE?
Boy, you know, that almost gets me to my next segment. Bob Howe, HOWE, the tent designer, he designed a geodesic dome tent for them that they carried in their catalog for a while.
Oh, you know what? Bob Hissey. Bob Hissey was another Early Winters employee. I've had some conversations with him in the past. Yeah, he said he worked with Early Winters at the time, worked for Ron. So it looks like he's the illustrator in that cookbook.
And it does say, now that I took out my magnifying glass, it says copyright Early Winters, so it is one of their products.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So Early Winters, to me, represents kind of the ultimate little company, like so many of the others that we've talked about, these early companies. They started with just a dream on an extremely small, underfunded scale. And who knows how many were like that I never even heard of that failed. But this one rose, and the introduction to Gore-Tex was the magic bullet for them. And then they attempted to continue onward with their core products and all of this real quiche stuff. And then got bought up and then gradually faded out of existence. Where have we heard that story before? The most pathetic thing to me was the last Saheli catalog that I have, which has a bunch of products from other companies in it. And one thing labeled as Early Winters Parka, Gore-Tex Parka, and Gore-Tex pants. That's it. Early Winters. Everything else is by somebody else. It's not really an Early Winters catalog anymore, but apparently they had retained the ownership of the brand. Somehow had this early winter pattern that they were still producing. So that's the history of Early Winters. And I wanted to point out that these companies don't usually start in a vacuum. There are other companies, other people in the industry who are helping out or collaborating. In the case of Early Winters, believe it or not, they had connections to Rivendell.
Hmm.
Bill Edwards had climbed with Larry Horton in the Tetons in particular. So both of the two anyway, both of the Bills were actually pretty good climbers and had done some pretty important things. There was a custom pack company, small company that became well known among, let's say, Seattle area climbers, Schoenhofen packs, Mike Schoenhofen. And as they knew him, and as Mike started getting more sales, he got overwhelmed in his little one-man operation. So Early Winters loaded Mike on an airplane, and they flew out to the Tetons to visit Larry Horton. And the purpose of that was to have Larry Horton begin producing some of the packs, because they used the same fabrics, and they had all the heavy equipment to sew these heavy-duty packs, these heavy-duty Schoenhofen packs. And then the Schoenhofen packs were an internal, kind of an X-frame internal pack that was for a while sold in the Early Winters catalog. So you have these interconnections. So companies hardly ever develop in a total vacuum. I have some emails from Early Winters employees who left the company and ended up elsewhere, like at Yak Works, Don Wittenberger. And to me, it's always very interesting to see how the skills and the sometimes even the patterns migrate around into other companies, whether they're startups or whether it's that somebody who has knowledge about Early Winters ends up somewhere else at an existing company and then starts to share.
Just a thought, I guess. It seems like one of the most impactful takeaways from Early Winters is the use of Gore-Tex, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that we're having this conversation now, considering the passing of Bob Gore, right?
Indeed, yes.
Just in the last couple of weeks. And so it's interesting that this wasn't really planned. Obviously, we had been planning on having this conversation for a while, so it's interesting timing, as an aside. But I think that one of the big takeaways is just that use of new materials, right? I think Dr. Gross has mentioned in the past, kind of this era is defined by new materials. Innovation in materials is kind of, from around this time onward is kind of the defining point of this era of outdoor gear history. Is okay, now it's all about using new materials, right? And new materials have been used, with the introduction of nylon and different materials like that in the past. But it seems like, okay, this is the time where you're getting polar fleece, you're seeing Gore-Tex fabrics being used. It's from here on out, it's all materials, and how do we make it lighter, faster, stronger? The industry's always had a focus on that, but it seems like now it's at the material level, right? So I don't know.
Sure.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Early Winters, in terms of materials, you cannot escape a discussion of tent poles, right? The fat, straight aluminum poles that were used in all these previous tents, from Jerry, from North Face, that was about to change over the next 10 to 15 years, as Easton in particular developed poles that could bend or had pre-bent curves in them. Of course, Warmlight was doing that since 1964. But anyway, everybody else had to catch up. And in Early Winters' case, they had a pole that was like fiberglass, real small diameter, bendable, that you push down and lock together the sections. A real different design. I get actually every few months I'll get a distressed email from somebody. I broke one of my early winter's poles. Oh, I really need a new one. Can you help? Well, guess what? I refer them to Tentpole Technologies, but really nobody's making those poles anymore. So again, the poles are an essential part of the evolution of the materials. And then of course, in the ultralight movement, you've got just one evolution after the other, including innovation like Cuban fiber, to the lighter and lighter and lighter fabrics that are nylon and sil nylon and and then Cuban fiber, non-woven, and then we're not even sewing the seams anymore. Now we're gluing them together. So yeah, just like you say.
Well, yeah, I thought it was an interesting point to bring up. It kind of seems like that's one of the legacies of this company, right? They have that claim to fame of having that first Gore-Tex Parka. What were they using for the tent and parka before that? What were materials that they were using for those products?
They didn't have it. No, they went from.
They just hadn't developed anything until they had. So why? So I guess how did do you happen to know how Gore-Tex came across them? What products were they selling for Gore-Tex to approach them and say, "Do you want to buy Gore-Tex to make something out of?"
Well, again, hopefully one of the Bills or Rons will tell us the full story. But in the industry, you have people, the go-betweens from the fabric manufacturers to the companies, going around saying, how many billion yards of 1.9 ounce ripstop do you want to order this year? And we have a new product, whether it's polar fleece or whether it's Gore-Tex. And they were smart enough to say yes to that fabric purveyor as he came around. And no, this is something I'd love to hear them talk about. How did they go from, we don't even have a mountain parka, we don't even have a tent, to these rather sophisticated designs? Were they designers of that caliber? And if so, where did they get their expertise or training? I don't know these answers.
Right, because that's my other question regarding the tent. A tent is a complicated product. And in a lot of ways, as you and I have discussed, it's architecture, right? You think about the Bill Mosses, right? That's an architect that designed tents, or the Jack Stevensons, who's an engineer who thinks about structures in that way. And you mentioned, was it Bill? Which
Bill Edwards?
Bill Edwards was an architect, so maybe there's some of that influence there in the creation of tents.
Well, we'll have to ask him, huh?
Yeah, this is motivation to get on and clarify the story.
Now, let's put on a picture of the light dimension from the catalog. It should be fairly easy to find among the first images. The light dimension was their signature and the first Gore-Tex ever tent. And to me, since I have owned and used warm light tents, this looks absolutely like a warm light tent made out of Gore-Tex. There's a few minor differences, but it sure does look like there must have been a design influence from warm light in there somewhere.
Right, because it's clear that Jack Stevenson introduced the tunnel tent, right? With his design, and that introduction of more of those flexible poles, the elliptical arch. So the industry was moving this direction, since
Yeah.
55, right? It seemed like it just took a while for people to really adopt the tunnel tent idea. I don't know.
Well,
Was there kind of a gap in time between, like, was it 55 when that was introduced, and then?
Stevenson was uh, had prototypes in 1958.
Okay.
He sold a few privately during the early 60s, but they hit the catalog first time in 64. I might mention, this is interesting too. 1972, the same year that Early Winters introduced their Omnipotent, across the ocean, Hilleberg Tents introduced their tent, which looked very much like a Stevenson tent. So there's all kinds of things here that probably you or I will never know. But
Right. Well, and
about
we've talked in the past about, I think we talked about the was it the Jensen pack, right? Where the origins of the Jensen pack, right? And it seemed like there were multiple companies around that time who were all creating similar concepts, trying to create a frameless pack that could distribute the weight better, and without the use of a frame or an external frame. And it kind of goes back to that idea, like I think you're mentioning, that some of these things people are just thinking are on the same wavelength, even across the ocean, right? Or people really are aware of other people's products, and there's something nefarious there. But I think in most cases, people are kind of thinking along the same lines, in different ways, and end up at kind of similar conclusions. So again, we'll have to talk to the people who are involved to really understand where some of these ideas came from. But
I think it can be as simple. I've thought about this too. I mean, it could go all the way from they've actually been on a camping trip with somebody who owned one of whatever the Stevenson tent, and then they really had a chance to really understand it. Or it could be they just saw it in a Summit magazine.
Yeah.
And said, "Oh, no, that's an interesting looking design.
Right.
Oh, I wonder if I could make something like that."
Right. Yeah. So it kind of goes back to that idea of the evolution of gear, right? This is how it happens, right? Is these different founders maybe seeing something out in the wild, they're seeing something like you said in Summit, or they go camp with a friend and they have a new piece of gear, and that's how it evolves, right? It is kind of interesting to see like how organic that evolution can be.
Now, I will have you put on a couple other tent pictures. Early Winters did try to expand their tent line when the geodesic revolution hit in 76. Okay, so right here, this green tent, this is not an Early Winters design. They contracted with Bob Howe, who almost got the credit for the first geodesic tent. There's a big story behind that one too, but he was designing for a lot of the big companies for many years, all the way up to and including companies like Cabela's. But anyway, so he had a three-person Gore-Tex geodesic dome that Early Winters was selling for a while, a year, maybe two, until they decided they were going to make their own dome tent design. And I don't know, maybe that was Bill Edwards. Yeah, I have one of these.
Well, yeah, we got to go to the next one.
Oh, me. Yeah. Yeah, so this is a Gore-Tex design. The poles are in sleeves on the exterior. So it's a real strong, very tight, taut setup, shaped somewhat ergonomically, skinnier, longer. And I don't know how big a part of the pie they became, their dome tents, their Gore-Tex dome tents. But they did. It would be remiss of me not to mention that they had those.
It's interesting that, kind of these larger forces in the industry, it's as soon as someone introduces something, right? It's like with maybe the North Face and the geodesic, right? Or you know, what, any of those the early dome tents, it seems like there's kind of a rush after that. It's like, oh well, we got to catch up. I don't know if that's the case with early winters, but anytime there's some kind of a new technology or new design that's introduced, it seems like you can kind of see a lot of other companies at the same time trying to create their own version of that, right? Or
There,
variation with
there
their
you
own
go.
spin.
Yes. So let's go to a weird looking thing called the Pocket Hotel. There's this one, and I think another one after this. This is like a modified Omnipotent. And the goal was something for one person that was better than a bivouac sack. So the front of it is like a tiny mini tent, a little tiny Omnipotent, and it's Gore-Tex. And the feet section is like a bivouac sack. It's like a combo, a
Yeah,
hybrid.
with no structure on the outside, really.
So
Interesting.
see if there's another picture of that. I think there is. There's that, yeah, and that.
So what
So
was the idea behind this? Really, like, you just, there's less tent to pack, and
yes,
then you just
it's
stick your feet out the bottom.
it's a one person hybrid between a Omnipotent tent and a bivouac sack.
Interesting. Huh.
So again, they had some quirky stuff,
Yeah.
Gotta give them credit there. They also had a light dimension that had been modified to include a mid pole, and that's called the winter light.
Right. And you mentioned this, is this more of kind of the expedition kind of product, something with the mid pole, something a little stronger?
Again, yes, it's like the Omnipotent. Yeah, they continued to carry that, but once they got Gore-Tex tents, then they were modifying the light dimension into a more of a four-season tent.
Right. So this conversation came up with Bob Edwards a little bit, and regarding a previous episode. And if you want to cut this part, we can cut this part. But where do you see some of the major differences between a Jack Stevenson, tunnel tent, and the elliptical arch, and the Omnipotent? There's got to be some differences there.
Oh,
I know
sure.
that was something that Bill mentioned, right? No, we did
Uh-huh.
something kind of our own. Where do you see the major differences?
Well, there are several major differences. First of all, Jack Stevenson would have your head for calling his tent a tunnel tent.
Hmm.
It's as an aeronautical engineer, it's an elliptical arc, ARC, and so this thing has a vestibule on it right now, which disguises its nature a little bit. But first of all, Stevenson poles were rigid.
Hmm.
They were pre-bent, but they were rigid. And that's for a really big design reason. And it's no accident that Stevenson poles were specially manufactured to be pre-bent aluminum poles and inserted through sleeves on the exterior to create a trim aerodynamic profile. So the poles in the light dimension, winter light, whatever, they're these flexible fiberglassy, maybe graphite. I can't remember exactly what they said the composition was, but anyway, they're flexible. And they do go into sleeves, and they do stay on the exterior, so producing more of a smooth airflow. So what you have here is just this, other than the fact that they have thrown away Stevenson's concept of a double-walled, impermeable material, fabric. right? They've thrown it away. They say, Gore-Tex, it breathes. We don't need Jack Stevenson's stupid idea about an impermeable vapor barrier interior to the tent. We don't want that. We don't like that. So that's another huge difference. But the tent itself, my God, you look at it, you go, oh, look at that. From the front, it looks just like a warm light tent.
Right.
Even pulls out the same way across here. They've put a double zipper here instead of Stevenson was always kind of into that one single zipper. That's the main stuff that I see.
Right.
There are some authentic differences, some really key design differences. This is their signature Gore-Tex Parka. They called it the Lost World. It was a very sophisticated parka design, not at all like what you might sew together from a Frostline kit mountain parka, just in terms of the features and the design. This was a very sophisticated design and very elegant design.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that we were able to look at so many pictures. These visuals are really helpful. I think we touched on a lot of the key takeaways from the company, but what do you, I guess if we could sum it up, what do you think the legacy of Early Winters is? It seems to have a cult following still. I mean, as you've mentioned, people continue to reach out to you, asking where they can find different items. You know, the founders are still out there and active and involved and care about the history, which I'm happy to, you know, it's been fun to interact with some of those founders as well. But where do you see the legacy of the company? Where do they fit within this larger history of gear?
Well, for me, as the history of gear, like historian, they have to have a place because they were the first to jump on to Gore-Tex and turn it into parkas and a tent.
Right.
I would be totally remiss to not include them in the history, whether they were a big, small, or gigantic success with what they did. They were the first, and sure, there were a lot of other companies nipping at their heels in the next 6 to 12 months. Lots of companies who started throwing out the Gore-Tex products, but they were the first.
Right.
And
Well,
then, as I said, this idea of trying to develop an income stream to stay afloat by selling all these loosely affiliated, interesting products with some real marketing flair.
Right. Well, I think that's a recurring theme as we've talked about different companies, and you mentioned this at kind of the top, but all of these companies seem to go through this challenge of, you know, there are a lot of outdoor enthusiasts out there who will buy a tent, but if we make a really good tent, they're not going to ever come back to us, right? You know,
Yes.
if we make a really good parka, they're only going to buy, you know, a parka, or maybe they'll buy a couple. But then the idea is, you know, for sustainability's sake, and for a quality perspective, we don't want them to have to come back, I guess. And so, you know, I'm not sure how much of that thinking went into this idea of we need to make complementary products or other products to pull people in. That's a constant push-pull that we're seeing. And Don Wittenberger of Yak Works and now Rivendell mentioned that same thing. He said we couldn't continue as a business because our product was so good, which I guess is an interesting problem to have. You want to make good stuff, and you know, you hopefully you don't want to compromise and make bad stuff that's going to fail and people have to come back to you. But this is the one tactic, one strategy that it seems like Early Winters was, you know, really pushed, which is another takeaway. I think they found ways to create revenue streams, you know, and keep the business going.
And so for your young designers, Bill Nicolai, okay, so there he is. He's got this great design, and he's cutting it out with an X-Acto knife in a friend's basement, and he must have a sewing machine, and he's trying to figure out how to sew it right. And young designer with no backing trying to make a go of it. Do those exist anymore? I would say, yeah, they do. And so I would add to that, I was at a gear conference in Portland 5 or 6 years ago, where a whole lot of young designers had products that were just their own little products. A new kind of bicycling pant, for instance, that they were trying to make a go of, right? And other products that were different people inventing around the Northwest, basically, although that guy was from New York City. So people are out there, and I wouldn't want to discourage people from trying. You got a good design, you got to start getting it out. I'm sure you guys in your program delve into that subject, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's a huge, we actually have quite a few students in one of the, I think our junior studio class that are working on tents right now. And who's to say some of our students couldn't follow the same path as some of these companies? That's the hope. And the motivation behind some of these stories is, we need to preserve the stories in order for other people to learn the lessons from them. So my hope is some students take away, well, and non-students, right? Anyone who's listening can, be inspired by some of these founders, right? It's like, you can cut out some fabric in your friend's basement and sew something together, right? It takes work, but you can start something.
Yeah. If you look at early winters, you have a designer with a vision like Bill Mcfly, but then he pulls in somebody with an architecture background who helps to perfect those designs and bring new designs on. But then he's got a terrific marketer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a key in a number of these early companies, that they didn't have that. They didn't have somebody who was a really good marketer.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's another key takeaway, right? Is this idea of a team. A lot of these companies that we've talked about, it seems like it's usually one individual or two that start something, right? It's Jack Stevenson, doing a lot of this kind of, it's all his ideas. He's making it. Larry Penberthy, right? Yvonne Chenard. It's kind of a single person. I feel like this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, this seems like one of the first where it's like we're really focusing on a founding team, and they all have their own specialization.
Yeah. Within the first few years, they had put together this real core team, and they mentioned their head sewer. Now, that in a way is the story of Hollybar too, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Because you had Roy, who was really good at sourcing all this stuff, from Europe, or connections to Bob Bruning, the blacksmith, to make all this ironware, and bringing in a steady income stream, I might add, from his job at the university as a professor. And Alice, the design genius. And they had Jane Fortin, who was, you might say, the head sewer, who also did some design, which would be apparently like this woman that Bill Edwards mentions here, Helene. I have not talked to her, but the head sewer, where was that? Anyway, they had from the start, they had a very skilled sewer to really do things. Jansport, if you think about that, Murray, the design genius, who won the seed money in a contest to get the company started, but he didn't know how to sew.
Right.
So that's where Jan came along, and the company became Jansport, and she
Right.
was a big sewer of the designs for many, many, many years. So, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that, Chase. The idea of a team. You look at Warmlight. What could I say about them? They always needed a member on the team who was really good customer relations, because that wasn't Jack.
Right. Right. Well, and it seems like team is going to be the core moving forward for a lot of these companies. We had Al Tabor on and shared his episode recently, and that was a core team of, I don't remember how many people started Mountain Hardware. He said there were like
Yeah,
6 or 7, and they all had their own area. And so it seems, I don't know. A team was always important for some of these outdoor companies, but it seems like it usually led with one name, one individual. But it seems like we're moving more into, okay, teams. These are real companies. These aren't just, not necessarily just people in a garage. Although there's an aspect of that. It's, okay, we're starting a company. We all have our, our thing that we're working on. We have our different roles. We're kind of moving into that phase or that stage era of the industry.
yeah. As maybe a last thought here, I'll throw up. Do you remember Back to the Future?
Oh yeah.
Okay, the kind of rust-colored down vest that what's his name, Marty Mcfly, or
Yeah.
was wearing. That was a Class 5 down vest. Class 5. A company that got started right around the same time as Early Winters, and led by this guy whose father was one of the German scientists who came over after World War II, Eustace, and his last name I've never been able to say, but Braunschweiger or something of that nature. Anyway, I still get requests for the Marty McFly vest. They think I'm Class 5. And this thing has become a very cult item. But he broke off from the early North Face. He'd also worked for Trailwise, but he broke off and he stole away 2 of the top North Face sewers. May Chin and what was the other one's name? He stole them away, and he started out this company as a team with himself, head designer guy, and these 2 highly skilled sewers who were part of the company. They weren't just, I hired these out on the street somewhere.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about this when we started the conversation, but it seems like that's another kind of key outcome or lesson from Early Winters, and kind of the era that we're moving into. So, well, any parting thoughts? Or we could probably wrap it right here. Bruce, I appreciate all your time. Unless you had, sorry, if you had one more thought on the company.
My only thought is to lay out the welcome mat for any of those folks, Bill Nicolai, Bill Edwards, Ron Zimmerman, to come forward during the winter months when there's no more hiking and correct me where needed and add to this story.
Yeah, no, they're playing hard right now. So hopefully we can get them when it's not it's not so easy to get out. So,
all right.
Okay. Well, thanks as always, Bruce. I appreciate you taking time and sharing your insights. And again, all the incredible work you've done to document all this history.